Help me, brother, I cried as I stumbled into my brother's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing ragged clothes and holding a baby in my arms. My brother was speechless at the sight of me, so changed and frail, clad only in a tattered shirt and barefoot. What on earth happened? He quickly asked, ushering me into the house and warming up the room. The baby, wrapped in my jacket, was sound asleep, but I couldn't stop shivering. Who did this to my precious little sister? My brother muttered through clenched teeth. Lily, it's going to be okay now. Upon hearing my brother's gentle voice, I felt a wave of relief wash over me as if all the strength had drained from my body. My name is Lily, a 27-year-old homemaker with a young son. I was once a nurse until Terry, the son of the hospital director, proposed to me. Terry was kind and efficient in his work, which initially attracted me to him. I have a brother who is 5 years older than me, and after our parents' tragic death in a car accident when I was 4 and he was in 3rd grade, he became my protector. Our parents died when their car was hit head-on by a truck whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. My mother, also a nurse, was working late, and it happened when my father went to pick her up. Before leaving to pick her up, my father had casually told my brother, Derek, I'm counting on you to take care of Lily. These words became unforgettable for my brother, who took them to heart and has protected me ever since. We never fought. He has always been like a superhero to me. After the accident, it seemed my brother and I would be sent to separate foster homes. However, our paternal grandparents, who we hadn't interacted much with until then, took us in. When I first met our grandfather, his white hair and bushy beard made him look like a storybook Santa Claus. Seeing Derek, he muttered, "You're the spitting image of your father," and I believe I saw tears in his eyes. Our grandmother was a kind woman who hugged me tightly and sobbed, "Poor child." Later, I learned that our father had fallen out with our grandfather, leaving home in what amounted to running away. Our grandfather wanted him to continue the family business, but our father wanted his freedom. Neither would yield, and they ended up parting on bad terms. Derek and I moved to our grandparents' house nestled in the rural mountains. Our grandfather, a renowned potter, created works so famous that a single teacup could sell for thousands of dollars. Thanks to this, Derek and I grew up without financial difficulties. Our grandfather was stubborn, hated dishonesty, and dedicated himself completely to his work, while our grandmother was incredibly kind. Despite our parents no longer being with us, under our grandparents' watchful eyes, we grew up happily. Derek attended a prestigious university in the city, and I went to nursing school. We both had the chance to follow our dreams. However, when our grandmother's health deteriorated, Derek returned home from the city. I wanted to return too, but as I was still a student, Derek advised against it. Derek had always been interested in our grandfather's work but was firmly told to follow his own path, leading him to university. I think our grandfather regretted forcing our deceased father to continue the family business and didn't want his grandchildren to go through the same thing. However, Derek insisted on being taught pottery by our grandfather. He had always been handy, making pottery a good fit for him. Besides, Derek excelled at everything: academics, sports, and he was popular among his friends. He was truly a superhero, taking care of our sick grandmother while mastering the art of pottery. While learning the trade from our grandfather, I graduated from nursing school and started working as a nurse. That's when Terry proposed, and we got married. We had a grand wedding, and what I remember most are the joyous smiles of Derek and our grandfather. Derek brought pictures of our parents to the wedding. "We all just want you to be happy, Lily, including Mom and Dad," he said, shedding tears openly. Our grandmother, too ill to attend, cried tears of joy when she saw the video of the ceremony. I felt truly blessed with a great family. I quit my job as a nurse, moved into my husband Terry's family home, and began to support him as a full-time homemaker. We had a child, and Terry was kind. Our life seemed smooth sailing, and I couldn't have imagined the hellish days that were to come. Not long after my grandmother passed away, Terry attended the funeral with me and comforted me. My grandfather's disappointment was so severe that I couldn't even speak to him. Derek, while supporting our grandfather, immersed himself more and more into his pottery. 6 months passed. "Help me, brother," I cried as I fled to my brother's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing ragged clothes and holding a baby in my arms. Derek was at a loss for words upon seeing my drastically changed appearance. I was so skinny and weak, just wearing a thin, tattered shirt and barefoot. What on earth happened? He quickly let me in and warmed up the room. The baby wrapped in my coat was sound asleep, but I couldn't stop shivering. Who did this to my dear sister? Derek murmured through clenched teeth. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as if all strength had left my body. I didn't want to worry Derek or our grandfather, but I had no choice but to tell them. I began to recount the events at my in-laws' house. Terry and I had been living together, but due to my in-laws' concern that I should rest during and after pregnancy, we moved into their house. My in-laws, both remarried, seemed like a genuinely close family. Terry was the stepson of my mother-in-law. I was happy that my child and I could become part of this family. My father-in-law was kind to me, telling me to make myself at home. Having no father, his kindness was precious to me. However, my mother-in-law seemed not to like this. "You're flirting with my husband, aren't you, you disgusting woman?" she began to say. She started harassing me when my father-in-law was not around. "You're an uneducated child with no parents," she said, not just verbally abusing me but also causing physical harm. She spilled boiling water towards me, planted pins in my meals, and even tried to push me down the stairs. It was life-threatening. My mother-in-law's family had a long-standing reputation in the retail business, managing a major department store chain run by her brother. "Your background is miles apart from mine. You can't blend with someone who grew up in poverty," she said, looking down on me. Then, a situation arose that added to my troubles. With a shortage of staff at the hospital, a former nurse was often called in to help, working alongside my husband Terry. During this time, I noticed something unsettling. Terry, being the son of the hospital director, was often seen reprimanding the nurses unreasonably. "Move quicker, you're a nurse getting paid, aren't you? Don't slack off just because my father is lenient. Once I take over this hospital, I won't be so forgiving. How many times do I have to tell you? Order the supplies in advance. They're not cheap, you know. Don't take running a hospital lightly." Such unreasonable remarks were directed at nurses who were working hard for the patients. "Terry, don't you think that's too harsh? Everyone here is trying their best," I interjected. He didn't take kindly to this. Furious that I had stood up to him, he flew off the handle in front of the other nurses. Since then, Terry became distant towards me. It might have also been influenced by my mother-in-law, who had been telling Terry from the start, "You're too soft on your wife. She's taking you for granted." While my father-in-law was still well, Terry couldn't be openly hostile or abusive in front of him. But then my father-in-law fell seriously ill and became bedridden. When it rains, it pours. My mother-in-law seized the opportunity and made me take care of all the chores, treating me like a housekeeper. I was extremely busy carrying my son on my back, cooking, doing laundry, and cleaning. Even in front of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law began to mistreat me, but my weakened father-in-law was unable to stop her. "Please don't speak to Lily that way," he would say. "Here you go again defending that woman, and you can't even do anything with your frail body. Oh, how I wish you were gone," she would retort, spewing venom at my sick father-in-law. I endured it for the sake of my son and father-in-law. The harassment escalated. "Housekeepers don't eat with the family. Eat the leftovers later," she told me. I was so upset that I lost my appetite. When I looked in the mirror, I was shocked to see my gaunt and ragged reflection. My husband said, "I only married you because you were a bit attractive, but I never thought you'd become such a shabby woman. I'm too embarrassed to be seen with you." He told me to move from our bedroom to the storeroom. How cruel can people be? My husband and mother-in-law began to verbally abuse even my son. "Of course he's not smart. Look at who his mother is," my mother-in-law would say. "His constant crying is annoying. Make him stop right now," my husband would demand. It felt as if something inside me had snapped. I had made up my mind to run away. My only concern was my father-in-law. If I didn't take care of him, he would be in trouble. However, my father-in-law said, "Don't worry about me, Lily. You should escape to your brother's place." He pulled out several $100 bills from under his pillow and pressed them into my hand. I decided to flee on the spot in the clothes I was wearing. I wrapped my son in my coat to keep him warm, rushed outside, hailed a taxi with the money my father-in-law had given me, and headed to my grandfather's house. I poured out the whole story to my grandfather and my brother Derek all at once. Derek, making a furious face I had never seen before, was shaking his clenched fist. Derek reassured me, saying, "You've had it tough, haven't you? It's okay now, relax." I burst into tears. My grandfather also muttered, "I can't forgive this." A few days later, I left my son with my grandfather and decided to return to my in-laws' house with Derek to collect my belongings. I had left in a hurry without a word, so I thought it would cause trouble if there was any fuss. When we returned to my in-laws' house, my husband muttered with a cold gaze, "You finally returned, huh?" Derek calmly replied, "My sister seems very distressed, so we'll be taking care of her for a while. We came today to collect some of her personal belongings." My husband retorted, "I married her, so if she doesn't come back, there will be no one to do the chores. That's a big problem for me." My mother-in-law, looking down on Derek, said, "I heard you do pottery. It must be a poor life, isn't it? Even if you take care of my daughter-in-law, it's going to be tough for you, right? Please send her back. It's a problem for us too." Derek clenched his fists tightly. I could see that he was desperately trying to suppress his anger. When we asked to take back our belongings, we were directed to a storage room in the corner of the hallway that served as my room. In the corner of the cramped room were cardboard boxes and old appliances carelessly placed. There were a few changes of clothes for me and my son, no heating appliances, just a thin blanket and a thin mattress. Derek was at a loss for words, seeing the harsh conditions I was living under. When he glared at my mother-in-law, saying, "Is this where you shoved my dear sister and her child?" she retorted, "She should be grateful just to have a room. She's just a housekeeper." I wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible, but I was worried about my father-in-law and wanted to see him. When I did, he quietly handed me something and apologized to Derek for not being able to protect me. For several days after that, we made preparations. Along with my grandfather and Derek, I headed to my in-laws' house. I was determined to fight for my son. I couldn't keep running away forever. When we arrived, I handed my husband the divorce papers. He was taken aback for a moment, but then declared he wouldn't pay alimony or child support since I was choosing to leave. I played a recording of his mother belittling me and him shouting at me. "This is evidence of the abuse I suffered," I informed them. My husband and mother-in-law looked shocked, asking, "When did you even record this?" It turns out my father-in-law had secretly recorded everything to help me. He had discreetly passed the recording to me when I went to collect my things a few days before. Derek, who had graduated from law school and passed the bar exam while assisting our grandfather with his pottery work, said I could get a divorce since my husband was at fault. Derek had been actively practicing law to help those in need in our local community, and now he promised to fight for me wholeheartedly. My wheelchair-bound father-in-law showed up and handed the divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He had also recorded all the verbal abuse he had endured and was now ready to divorce as well. He preferred living in a care facility over living with my mother-in-law. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law burst into laughter. "I'll gladly divorce you and return to my brother's house and go back to my luxurious life," she said. At that moment, my grandfather made a call stating, "I'll terminate any contracts with a family like this." It turns out the major department store run by my mother-in-law's brother was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had been eagerly trying to strike a deal to exhibit and sell my famous grandfather's pottery and was close to finalizing it. Immediately, a call came from her brother, the department store owner, severing ties. My mother-in-law blanched, muttering, "That's impossible," and sank to her knees. She finally seemed to understand her situation and started to beg. "Please forgive me. I was out of line. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me stay here, Lily. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." There was no way we could forgive her now. We all coldly stared at my weeping mother-in-law. However, just one person still didn't seem to fully grasp the situation. It was my husband. He said to me, "I'm set to inherit this hospital. If you want a divorce, I'll pay alimony and child support. I'll marry someone younger and prettier than you." But then my father-in-law said a single sentence, "The hospital has been sold." My husband's eyes widened in shock. What? In fact, Terry, requested by my father-in-law, had been pulling the strings. "Get out of here right now," my father-in-law screamed at his stepson. My husband's face turned white. He was not legally adopted by my father-in-law, who was actually his stepfather, so he had no legal claim on his stepfather's assets. On the contrary, I was legally adopted by my father-in-law, who had taken good care of me. Sensing the tide of events, my husband quickly changed his tune, pleading for a fresh start with me. I coldly dismissed him. Afterwards, my son and I were doted on and enjoyed life at my grandparents' house. He now cried less often and spent his time playing in nature, finding flowers and insects. My in-laws divorced. The audio tape proved crucial in establishing the fault of my mother-in-law. According to mutual acquaintances, my mother-in-law and husband are now living in a small rented apartment. Their attempts at finding new jobs had gone well, and they seem to be getting by on part-time work. Their days are filled with endless quarrels, each blaming the other for their current situation. My grandfather is living comfortably in a high-end senior home, and my son and I visit him often. Derek, as always, continues to work with pottery under my grandfather's guidance. My mother-in-law's brother, who wasn't at fault, had the pottery exhibition at a department store. At the exhibition, my brother met a lovely woman who was a fan of pottery, and they started dating. I expect we'll hear good news from him soon. I work as a nurse at a hospital near my grandfather's house. It was my dream to become a nurse like my mother, and now I find fulfillment in caring for my patients.